Howdy everyone, that media guy here, and I figured, since I'm a little bit light on time this week, something that I detailed on my recent community post, please go check that out and vote in the most recent poll, and please join my Discord, I would really appreciate it. But anyways, because I am light on time, I thought I would just kind of get a vlog out, since I'm currently working on my scripted review, and I've got Veggie Carnival to go for a Let's Play, but I know my Let's Plays don't get that many views, and, it's kind of weird. I don't know how I'm going to capture that one, because it's kind of a mini-game collection from what I've seen. I haven't played the game before. There might be a kind of more of a point-and-click style adventure game, like I just did with Veggie Island, that I could look at. But in the meantime, I thought today I would kind of get a vlog on something that's rather unique, something that I've kind of wanted to talk about for a little while at this point, and that is the book Me, Myself, and Bob, Phil Vischer's official autobiography. Now, if there's something you should know about me, it's that I don't really like reading. I did when I was a kid. I would read books as a kid. But now, as an adult, I mean, I do like reading things like Wikipedia, but in terms of what I just do to relax, you're not really just going to see me sitting down, flipping through a real page turner. I haven't come across many of those recently. And I also, on that note, I just want to say something. My parents, when they saw me doing things like watching videos and playing video games more often, they would tell me, put it down and read a book. And if that's still a mentality that parents have nowadays, for any kids that are watching this, I just want to make it clear, as long as your priorities are in check, like your grades are good, you're physically healthy and fit, you have a good social life, a good spiritual life, you're doing what you need to do around the house, you're doing whatever, if you have a job, if you're doing that properly, if your life is perfectly in balance, then honestly, who cares what you do with your free time? It's free time it's just that. It's free time. It's time that you're free to do whatever you want to do. And as long as it's not hurting anyone, then who cares? I mean, there's something to be said for doing things that, will get you to think critically, but that's a whole nother can of worms that I don't really want to get into. So, yeah, as a result, taking that into account, I just haven't felt the need or really the desire to read books just because that's not really the kind of person that I am. But me, myself, and Bob, this is something that's kind of been on my radar. And I guess kind of going into a little bit of history about me when it comes to VeggieTales. I loved it as a kid. Fell out of it, as I got older, teenage years. I feel like this is the same story for a lot of people. But then something happened. A couple things happened in 2019. I won't get into details in that right here. But I might make a video about that at some point because I think it's an interesting story. But needless to say, it got me interested in VeggieTales again, and it got me looking for content on it. And in 2020, there were two videos. The first one was by a channel, I think its name was Joshua Keefe. The video is called VeggieTales is Insane, although that's not what it used to be called. It was called Revisiting VeggieTales as an Adult. And that just kind of, it very much touched on the story of VeggieTales, what happened, why it kind of took its big downfall, but it didn't really go into all of the details. What did go into all of the details, and what I considered reacting to before making this vlog, was SaberSpark's video, The Rise and Fall of VeggieTales. What I would personally call his magnum opus, at least from what I've seen. I'm not a huge SaberSpark fan. I like some of the stuff that he's done. I don't think he's a bad creator at all. I just haven't watched, all of his, there's this stuff, like the mockbuster type that he kind of got his name for never really appealed to me. And some of the more modern movie reviews seem interesting. Maybe I should give SaberSpark another shot is what I'm trying to say. But yeah, that video is really good, coming out in 2020. And it got me really curious as to wanting to know the full story, wanting to get the big picture. And so, in 2022, about a year and a half ago now, I got the book Me, Myself, and Bob from one of my local libraries, and it ended up becoming the very first book that I had completed, like read from cover to cover in, I don't know how long, to be completely honest. This book is exceptional. I had long held that my favorite book that I had read was a book called The Collector by John Fowles. Uh, I'd recommend giving that a look. It's a very morbid premise, but that's kind of what got me hooked when I read it all the way back in sophomore year of high school, 8 or 9 years ago now. Holy crap! But that might still be my favorite work of fiction, but this is definitely my most favorite. Is that it? Most favorite? My favorite. Can there be more than one favorite? It's my favorite nonfiction book ever written, and I mean, to go in the book, I mean, I could explain why. Phil Vischer's writing style, Phil Vischer, he's, I want to say, a genius when it comes to wit. At least when it comes to, well, for both younger and older audiences. Reading his book, going through what his childhood was like, his formative years, eventually reaching college, founding Big Idea, and watching it all fall apart was really fascinating to me. And it's more about him, and I guess this is where I say, this video is going to be more about, him and what he's done rather than, an honest critique of the book. Like, to be honest, I don't really know how I would critique a book, like, in comparison to how I would critique a piece of television, what I've been doing with my episode reviews. That's why I thought this would be better as a vlog, not a structured review, because it's, am I supposed to say, oh, the diction is very well written? Like, I don't know how to critique books. Books are not my thing. But Phil Vischer, the creator or co-creator, depending on how much credit you want to give Mike Naraki, is what really fascinates me. So I just kind of wanted to highlight some of the biggest talking points of the book, or at least the biggest things that stood out to me. And I would say the biggest one is just, for one, the scale. The scale is the biggest part in terms of where he was when he started versus where he was now, and especially how old he was. As Phil Vischer was born in June of 1966, and he founded Big Idea Productions in, well, the Big Idea name came around in August of 1993, I believe, but GraphX Studios, what would become Big Idea Productions, the exact same company, that was founded in February of 1989. He was only 22 years old at the time. So maybe it's time you get out of your parents' basement, if I want to reference oversimplified of all channels. But yeah, the fact that he did that, I was still in college when I was 22 years old. I was, getting ready to graduate college around that time, and he already had the Big Idea created. Of course, the thing about college is that he ended up dropping out of college for failing chapel, which I know is one of those things like, wow, the guy who dropped out for failing chapel ended up creating the most successful Christian franchise in history. I totally get that viewpoint, and it is a little funny if you really want to think about it. But honestly, seeing what Phil Vischer has done, seeing how he's talked, how he's worked, he's just one of those people that I feel like the college system wouldn't really fit. There are, interesting how some of the most successful people out there are college dropouts. Everyone from Steve Jobs to PewDiePie. Did Michael Dell drop out of college? I believe Elizabeth Holmes dropped out of college, which I know is kind of the polar opposite of what I just said, but I find that story fascinating nonetheless, but it is definitely not in the scope of this channel. Please look that up on your own time. I find that really fascinating. But back on to Phil Vischer. I think, you can make jokes about his work ethic. Was chapel really so hard for him? But you can't deny that he put so much effort into creating VeggieTales. Some of the things that he details in the book, especially the things he had the bacteria that developed after he made the toy that saved Christmas. which you can find that out by watching the behind the scenes that you can easily find on YouTube. I might even make a behind the scenes compilation video. That may be one of my compilation videos that I do in the future, but there is so much content to sift through there that it might take me a little while on that front. Or maybe not, we'll see. But he also had mono, and he had shingles, and I'm pretty sure he had other things that I don't remember. So his body was literally imploding on him while his company was exploding. Um, and but ultimately his company did end up imploding. And there are several different reasons for this. Jonah was not the only one. Honestly, it was just a result of Phil's ambition. I think this might have even been said in the book, but I think it is the perfect analogy. Icarus flew too close to the sun. I think if Phil had simply ridden the ship and maintained Big Idea as a modest business, things would have ultimately worked out. There's something to be said about whether or not VeggieTales was a fad, but given the amount of, VeggieTales nostalgia there is nowadays, I think he could have made a sustainable business model out of that. But Phil wanted to be the Christian Walt Disney. He wanted to be basically, I don't know if this sounds presumptuous or not, he wanted to be the savior of media, the one that would bring kids away from, MTV? That was the biggest, number one public enemy for Christians at the time. Today, I don't even know if kids still watch MTV. If do you watch MTV? Let me know in the comments. But ultimately, that's what his main goal was. A noble goal, but a very, very big goal. I would say too big of a goal. It's not as ridiculous as, say, what Butch had in mind for Oaxis Entertainment, but still, it just seems a little unreasonable. And I don't want to put this all on Phil. One of the big problems that he highlights in the book is that he just kind of dealt with the wrong people. He hired the executive of Kraft Foods to be on his board. And there's a big difference between selling prepackaged food products and selling, religious animated talking vegetable Christian kids videos, if you get my drift. So yeah, you just kind of, I know Saberspark said that he felt very bad for Phil. And yeah, admittedly, there is a part of me as a fan that's like, yeah, I kind of wish that Phil had VeggieTales a little longer, because I feel like if he had, the quality of the show would not have dipped in the way that it did. But at the same time, I don't think that's all Phil Vischer's fault, because, ultimately, when you got to the classic media era, people still love those episodes. And obviously we'll get to this when I get to the reviews of these particular episodes, but I don't think I like those as much as the 90s episodes. Maybe I just have more nostalgia for those, because those were the videos that I had in my house, but ultimately, they aren't bad. I'm not going to say that. They aren't bad. Much like the Netflix series. And I think that's kind of the big thing about the book, or rather what's not in the book. Because you see, the book is, it was written shortly after Phil Vischer, the Big Idea, his company, filed for bankruptcy in 2003. Of course, there is an addendum in the book that talks about how the verdict that went over Big Idea's distribution deal and that ultimately sealed Big Idea's fate was overturned in 2005. That was a last-minute addendum for when the book came out in, I guess it would have been 2005. Again, originally not long after the bankruptcy in 2003, which is 20 years old now. In fact, I can't believe this. VeggieTales is turning 30 years old this year. Like what? Maybe I should do a video commemorating that. But so yeah, it's old, and just the thing is that was not where the craziness ended for Big Idea. Not by a long shot. And granted, a lot of it, after what happened, and I know I'm kind of getting beyond the topic of the book at this point, but this is just interesting stuff that I want to talk about. It all kind of comes in the same vein of the book, and I'm sure would have been included in the book if it was written today. We had the VeggieTales route going down the route by Classic Media, but then, of course, it would be bought out by DreamWorks Animation, under the NBC, Universal, Comcast, umbrella. And we would get the Netflix series out of that, to which, and I know a lot of people are probably wondering about my thoughts on the Netflix series. I've only seen part of the very first episode, and it doesn't seem awful, just like very generic kids TV. Which, I mean, the original VeggieTales, in my opinion, was kind of the antithesis to that. Granted, I say that, but one of the things with VeggieTales is that was created in the early 90s. There wasn't much kids meet TV around, or at least there wasn't the kids TV that we had today with the insane amounts of original programming from, even if you say the cable networks are dying, what Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network, and the Disney Channel are putting out nowadays is still very different from what was coming out in 1993 when the very first VeggieTales episode came out. But yeah, so obviously Netflix, that was its whole separate drama. That was very negative for both the fans of the show and obviously the original creative team. And of course, there was the effort to get the original creative team back together for the VeggieTales show, which people are wondering about my thoughts on that. I've seen more of that than I have of the Netflix series, and it's better than the Netflix series, but it still doesn't capture the magic of even the classic media era of VeggieTales had. But we had that, and it seemed like but it made Phil happy. And, they had Mike and Kurt back on board. That seemed all good, except turns out apparently NBC Universal had a bigger role in that than we originally thought. And now Bob and Larry don't even have their original voices anymore. As they've been recast for what was a radio show podcast like thing that brought up. I stopped caring anymore. It's hard for me to care when Phil Vischer, the heart and soul of VeggieTales, just kind of went his own way, and we will get to that in a second. But yeah, ultimately, and I guess I'll just ask, am I curious, is there anyone who's listened to that stuff, the stuff with the new voice actors for Bob and Larry on the radio or internet podcast? Have you listened to any of that? Does it capture the spirit of the original show? Like, even just a little bit? That would be something. Just let me know. I'm genuinely curious. Because it seems like that's what we're going to get instead of the continuation of the VeggieTales show, the return of the classic series, even the return of the Netflix series, and also the movies. We, of course, had the two VeggieTales movies, and I think those definitely deserve full videos on my part. But there's also supposed to be the Bob and Larry movie, and the main thing that intrigued me about that is that the Bob and Larry movie was supposed to feature humans. That has me really curious as to how that would play out. I don't know if it would be animated humans interacting with the veggies. I have no idea how that would work. I mean, granted, that was one of the main things when Mario Odyssey, a game that I personally love. Go watch my Mario movie reviews for more information on that. They managed to mix the cartoon and the more realistic human proportions rather well. But I don't know how that would have looked back in the early to mid 2000s. Nowadays, thinking about that, I kind of was wondering if they would go down the Lego movie route where they incorporate live action humans into the story somehow. Playing with, I was about to say playing with vegetables, but that sounds so very, 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 very wrong that I'm not going to go into that and just go down the Phil Vischer route. Because Phil Vischer despite having a more passive role, he wasn't completely done with VeggieTales. As I said, he continued to provide voices, and he wrote scripts for VeggieTales. Like, he wrote The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, and he wrote Lord of the Beans. Those are the two main ones that I know offhand. I believe it was one script a year that he wrote beyond that, and those are just a couple examples. Um, on that and the voicing, he ended up starting a entirely brand new endeavor. Kind of. I'm not saying he ever kept the dream of being a Christian Walt Disney. He might have been having more modest goals, but he still had new business ventures in mind. One of those being working with puppets. If you know anything about Phil, it's that he used to, he was a puppeteer in college, performing for his college students. That seemed to be where his focus was instead of, going to chapel. And ultimately, what his puppeteering ended up becoming post VeggieTales was What's in the Bible with Buck Denver. I haven't really seen too much of that. From what I have seen, I prefer the parts of it where it's just Phil Vischer talking to the audience. The stuff with the puppets, I mean, it's more charming than, again, what the Netflix series ever brought to the table, but I can't say that I absolutely fell in love with it. Um, they're probably the most intriguing thing is an interview that Phil did with Buck Denver, which kind of went into some of his personal insights and kind of a little bit of a retrospective about what he did with VeggieTales. Even if I personally disagree with some of the stuff he said in that, it's still very interesting. Almost makes me wish that he did that interview with a real person instead of a puppet, because that way I feel like adults like myself would end up taking that a bit more seriously. But so that's what he did there a long time. What's in the Bible? That took he did that for a few years. But alongside that, he also built a website, kind of a kid's website, kind of akin to, I don't know, Fun Brain, Pop Tropica. I don't know any of these things. Those are kids' website names that came to my head randomly. If you know what I mean, let me know in the comments below. If you visited those sites or I completely got those sites wrong, please let me know. And the website he built was called, Jelly Telly. Um, kind of a place where you pay to watch the What's in the Bible videos and the Buck Denver. Well, What's in the Bible with Buck Denver. It's all the same thing. But there's a lot of stuff under that umbrella, as well as play flash games. I'm pretty sure just kind of a place for kids to the portal for religious kids, for Flanders kids. No, I'm not going to go that far, but it seemed like a very novel concept. From what I believe, Jelly Telly doesn't really exist today. It's hard because a lot of it was Flash based, and of course, Flash went the way of Kodak. Of all companies that I bring up, a way of Blockbuster that might be better. Well, there's still one Blockbuster that exists. Anyways, it went down in its original form, I believe, in 2019, and it got rebranded as Nimo, which I believe is a more traditional streaming service, which has VeggieTales on it, I believe, in addition to a bunch of other media that you can go check out. Um, What's the more interesting thing is that Phil Vischer, he has his own streaming service that launched in 2020, which has basically everything that he's ever made post VeggieTales outside of the veggie world. That's where he has it. So go check that out if you're interested. And this isn't even mentioning the podcast. He does the Holy Post podcast, which has, I mean, I don't really keep up with that, but it's definitely over 500 episodes, I think, by this point. Definitely a very ambitious thing. Well, I say ambitious, it's a podcast, but the fact that he made it to over 500 episodes, that just screams ambition to me. So if you want to hear him talk about, I guess it's more about what's going on in the world than more his personal story. But that's something that interests you. You want to see it from his standpoint, from a religious standpoint. Watch him and his co-host Sky, and I actually don't know the other one. The woman, I believe, again, you're seeing my lack of knowledge here on all of this stuff. I don't keep up to date on all of this stuff, but if you want to watch that, then go check that out over there. And lastly, I think I'm probably going to wrap this video up because my voice is starting to hurt. Check out his blog. Check out his blog. I say that. Phil Vischer had a blog that he maintained. It's not maintained anymore. In fact, there have been times when I visited it where Google Chrome was like, this is a potentially dangerous website. Do you want to check that out? So because of that, I may not have that website linked in the description because I don't want YouTube to flag me for that. But if you can find it, just search for Phil Vischer blog on Google. It should be the first thing that pops up. Because he had a blog. Granted, like I said, he hasn't maintained. The last post he had about this was in 2020, March 2020, basically pointing people towards his new streaming service, Mr. Phil TV, at the onset of the pandemic. And his most recent posts were about that, things like advertising his Holy Post episodes, as well as his New Kids Bible. The last blog post that he made, actually, as part of a blog, a journal entry, was back in 2016, over 7 years ago now. But he started his blog in 2004, and there's a big backlog of stuff there, going all the way back to, what's essentially covered in the book. It's a series of blog entries called Whatever Happened to Big Idea, and basically chronicling, some parts of the book. Some text from the book is quoted verbatim, including a thing towards the Chicago Cubs, which I personally love, even though the Cubs ultimately won their World Series title, back when it came out. I still love it as the baseball nerd that I am. But yeah, it details a lot in that. I think and even jokes like, hey, this is going to be part of my new book. I would detail more in here, but my publisher wouldn't like it if I detail all of the stuff that's going to be in the book for you to buy. So, ultimately, read all of that there. It's really fascinating. Well, I say read all of that there, but ultimately you don't have to if you want to check out the book, which I highly recommend you do check out the book. It really is worth your time, at least if you're a VeggieTales fan. I'm assuming if you're watching this video, then you are a VeggieTales fan. But if you aren't, I think the book might ring hollow for a bunch of you. I still think it's an interesting story about an entrepreneur who ultimately had great success and great failure at not at the exact same time, but in the same life. I think that's personally very fascinating, and it really spoke to me as a VeggieTales fan who's going forward to reviewing every single one of the 50 episodes of the original run. So yeah, that's pretty much all that I wanted to say about this. Let me know in the comments, what are your thoughts on me, myself, and Bob? What are your thoughts on the Saberspark video about it? Have you read Phil Vischer's blog? And do you want to see me do more vlogs like this? I'm always looking for, this is kind of content that I can get out in a relatively short period of time. I just need topics to think about, and since I have not much time in this upcoming week, that might be something that I personally look into. So yeah, with all of that said, thank you so much for watching. Click the red button to subscribe, and have a fantastic rest of your day doing whatever.